And it is my privilege to introduce Basketball Hall of Famer Pat Williams, co-founder and senior vice president of the NBA's Orlando Magic. How many Orlando Magic fans do we have? Yeah. I was there Thursday night with a member of the church, and they pulled out a win, so it was nice to be there and celebrate another win with the Magic. As one of the world's top motivational speakers, Pat Williams has addressed members of Fortune 500 companies, national trade associations, and universities in the United States and abroad. I am so pleased to have him with us here today. Pat has been the general manager with NBA teams in Chicago, Atlanta, Philadelphia, including the 1993 world champions, the 76ers, and now the Orlando Magic, which he has helped lead to the NBA Finals in 1995 and in 2009. Pat has been able to meld great leaders and great talents such as Dr. J, Moses Malone, Charles Barkley, Maurice Cheek, Shaquille O'Neal, and Penny Hardaway into some of the most memorable championship teams. 30 of his teams have gone to the NBA playoffs, and 6 have made it to the NBA Finals. Pat is author of over 100 books, and there's a table in the back, and after today's service, Pat is going to be available to sign some of those books on a wide range of subjects, including sports leadership, teamwork, peak performance. From 1996 to 2011, he competed, and this is amazing, Pat, in 58 marathons, including the Boston Marathon 13 times. Amazing. In 2011, Pat was diagnosed with a blood cancer, a form of blood cancer, and he has since won his battle with cancer and is now in complete remission. And all God's people said, amen. And if that wasn't enough, Pat and his wife Ruth are the parents of 19 children, including 14 adopted from 4 foreign countries. They also have 15 grandchildren and counting. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Mr. Pat Williams.
You might recall from your Old Testament reading that Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, they say, had really done a bang-up job in his role as a leader and an influencer. And God was so pleased that he came to Solomon and said, Solomon, I will grant anything you want. You name it, you've got it. Well, that's a pretty good offer, isn't it? By the way, how would you answer that question? If God came and said, whatever you want, pick it, you've got it. Could be a struggle. But Solomon did not struggle. He simply said, God, I want wisdom above all else. Wisdom. I find that very, very interesting. What is it about wisdom that drew Solomon? Well, wisdom is a big deal to God. It's a real big deal. In fact, in the opening verses of the book of James, half-brother of Jesus, we read these words, if any of you lack wisdom, just ask of God. He's going to give it to you. It says he's going to give it to you in abundance. And God is not going to scold you. In other words, you can go to God as many times as you want, endlessly, asking for wisdom, and God is never going to say, hey, bud, you were just on me this morning, needing wisdom about that errant child of yours, and now you're back here in the afternoon because you need wisdom about the boss that you're working for and you're struggling with him, and why don't you come back to me in about 2 weeks, and we can get more discussion on this wisdom thing. According to James, that's never going to happen. we can go to God endlessly asking for wisdom. And he's going to hear us, and he's going to give it to us. It's pretty amazing, isn't it? And so basically we're saying, or we're instructed, God, I've got a meeting coming up in about 10 minutes. Please grant me wisdom. I'm going to need it. And then maybe that evening your son's had a bad day in school and he's there struggling, and at that point, God, I'm going to need wisdom as I'm talking and instructing and trying to help my son. And according to James, he's going to give it to you. Wonderful promises. So wisdom is a big deal with God. How many people in your life have wisdom? I mean, I'm not asking a show of hands or anything, but are there people in your life, and have there been people in your life who possess this quality called wisdom? I'll tell you in advance, not many come along. Pretty rare quality. And when you find a person with wisdom, that's a big deal. And you want to hang with them. You want to spend time with them. Well, let me tell you about my first real encounter with wisdom. I was 24 years old. I'd spent the previous years in baseball. The Phillies had signed me to a minor league contract. I was a ball player for a couple of years until the Phillies realized that the only way I was going to get to a big league ballpark was to buy a ticket like anybody else. But I got into the front office end of baseball, and in February of 1965, I'm 24 years old, and the Phillies said, we've got an opening as the general manager of our farm club in Spartanburg, South Carolina. And I said, sounds good. You know, I would like that position. And then before I headed down there, they instructed me to go look up the owner of the team. When I got there, I had his name. His name was Littlejohn, Mr. Littlejohn, R.A. Littlejohn. They said he was a very successful businessman, loved baseball, owned the team. They gave me the address where he lived, and I arrived in Spartanburg on a kind of cold, drizzly Sunday, February 1965. I knocked on the door. I was nervous. I mean, my stomach was plowing. And a woman came to the door. It turned out to be Mrs. Littlejohn. Everybody just called her Sam. And we had a little chat. She explained that her husband was away that day, would look forward to seeing me the next day at his office. And then before I left, she said, no matter how long you're in ball, that's what she called it, baseball. She said, no matter how long you're in ball, she said, you will never meet another man like my husband. Now, up to that point, I had never heard a wife say anything like that about her husband. And I haven't heard a wife say it since. You'll never meet another man like my husband. Well, here's what happened. I spent 4 years there as the general manager of the Phillies Farm Club. Mr. Littlejohn was the owner. He adopted me, really. He had 2 daughters. I think I was the son he never had. So it was more than a owner and an employee relationship. I mean, he really took me under his wing, invested in me, a godly man, a deacon at the First Baptist Church in Spartanburg, strong Christian man. And as it turns out, he had a wonderful quality that I had never encountered before called wisdom. And over those 4 years that I was with him, and then maybe 20 years beyond, after I got into the National Basketball Association and began running teams in different parts of the country, I mean, I never did anything of significance without talking to him and getting his input, getting his thoughts, and he always had it for me. But as the years went on, he died about 20-some years ago, I've thought a lot about it, this whole issue of wisdom. And with God's involvement in his life, he had this quality. And he passed on to me, and I'm going to share them with you, 6 wisdom principles that he was really strong on and that had been part of his life. And he poured them into me as a young man, just starting in the sports business. 6 wisdom principles that became a big part of my life. Would you like to hear them? Would you like to know what they were? Okay, do you have paper? Good. Do you have a writing instrument? Got a pen or a pencil? Do you have lipstick or mascara, ladies, if you don't have anything else? All right, I'm ready if you are. Wisdom principle number 1 from Mr. Littlejohn. Control those things over which you have control and let go of everything else. Now, the 2 biggest deals to me in running that minor league team for the Phillies were, number 1, who are our players going to be? Who are the Phillies going to send to us? What kind of a ball club were we going to have? And secondly, what kind of weather are we going to have? Particularly in our big home games that we've been planning all winter to put people in the ballpark. And what kind of weather were we going to have? I all but wore out my stomach lining on what kind of players the Phillies were going to send us. And more importantly, who were they going to take away? I mean, if a kid started getting really hot, doing well, you know, they could move him right away. You move him up to another level and just take him away. I mean, he was Phillies property. Oh, and the weather. You should have seen me doing anti-rain dances and waving the clouds. You know, the black, dark clouds would rev up about, well, you know, living in Orlando, you know what the drill is. You've seen it. Well, it happens in other places. Oh, those terrible, ugly black clouds about 4 o'clock. Oh, and then the phones would start ringing. It's raining here in Cowpens, or it's raining in Pacolet, you know. Well, it's not raining at the ballpark. There's going to be a game tonight? Oh, miserable. And my poor stomach. Well, Mr. Littlejohn saw this, and he spotted it. And he pulled me aside one day, and here's what he said. He said, and I'll try and do his South Carolina accent, Pat. He said, this thing with the Phillies, tell me, how much control really do you have about these players that are coming here and those that are leaving? How much control? And I, as a young baseball guy, boy, it was hard to admit, I have 0 control. It's all happening in Philadelphia. They're making every decision, even though I think maybe I'm part of it. But he said, not really. It's all being controlled out of Philadelphia. And then he asked me, and this weather bit, how much control really do you think you have over whether it's going to rain or not, or whether it's going to be a nice sunny evening? How much control do you really have? None. And then he said, how much control do you think you have over how clean your ballpark is? And I said, a lot. And how hot those hot dogs are. And how frosty are those cold drinks? I said, oh, we can control that. And how clean the restrooms are. And how friendly the attendants are at the ballpark. Oh, I've got lots of control on that. He said, why don't you just focus on that? Just focus on those issues that you can control and let go of everything else. Now, I wish I could tell you that I got that lesson quickly and applied it immediately. It took a little while, and I'm still working on it. Are there any fellow control freaks in here this morning? I see a few hands. I think we're all kind of that way. I mean, we want to control everything. And so, I mean, not too many years ago, I called a press conference here, you may remember, and gathered the media, and I announced that I was resigning as general manager of the universe. And I explained to the media that I had failed in dealing with the population issues of China and the economy of India and global warming and the ozone layer. I mean, I just explained to the media it had been a total failure, and I was resigning. And I explained to the media that I was going to really focus on the only thing that I have any control over. Took 60 years to figure this out. The only thing I have any control over is my attitude. That's it. And every day I get to pick it. In fact, many times a day I get to pick it. And by the way, I've learned it's important to pick a good one. Makes a big difference. I mean, I think that's the only thing that God has given us control over as Christians. I mean, our attitude, we get to pick it. And when you pick a good one, oh my, it makes all the difference in the world. Oh, your character issues and your work ethic and your relationship with other people. Ooh, it's a big deal. Really works. But Mr. Littlejohn shared with me that first wisdom principle. Control those things over which you have control and release everything else. Now here's wisdom principle number 2. Be patient, Pat. Be patient. Oh, I can still hear his voice. The first season, 1965, we didn't have a very good team, but we had a good year. I mean, we put a lot of people in the ballpark and we entertained them, and it was quite a year. We began to get some national publicity about our team, what was going on. And the season came to an end, late August. Been a good year. I was now 25. Anyway, I remember sitting in Mr. Littlejohn's car on that last night, out in the parking lot of the ballpark, basically saying goodbye. That it was just going to be a matter of time that fall until I got a call from the Yankees or the Dodgers or your Cubs, perhaps the Phillies, to come to their city and run their team. Fortunately, Mr. Littlejohn did not laugh at me. I mean, he could have really destroyed me. But here's what he said. He said, Pat, he said, be patient. He said, you need to come back here next year and do this again. He said, there are a lot of one-shot wonders out there. I mean, they can go in and hustle up things, sell this, that, and the other for 1 year, and And that's the end of it. They can't come back because nobody wants them to come back. He said, you need to come back here and prove that you can do better and you can do this again. And then he made a very interesting statement. He said, and you can go to the big leagues from Spartanburg. Now, Spartanburg was the lowest level of minor league baseball. And players and managers and front office, well, they go from low A to high A, and they go to double A, triple A, and then if they're fortunate, they get to the big leagues after all those steps. And Mr. Littlejohn is saying to me, you can go to the big leagues from Spartanburg. I need to jump ahead 3 years. I'm now 28. I've become a Christian in Mr. Littlejohn's arms, out at his office, where the claims of Christ had really come through. And I had to tell somebody, and I thought of him, and I went out to see him and just collapsed in his arms, and he encouraged me to make that decision. That was in February of 1968. I was 27 years old, and I came to Christ right in his office. And 6 months later, the phone rang. It was the general manager of the 76ers in Philadelphia, Dr. Jack Ramsey, who was about to become their coach and needed somebody to run their front office. I'd never met the man. That's how God works. And I went up for 2 interviews, and they hired me, 28 years old, to run their front office because Jack was going to be a full-time coach. And I thought back, Mr. Littlejohn saying, you can go to the big leagues from Spartanburg. Be patient, Pat, be patient. I mean, that was his message. Do any of you need to hear that? I mean, we want things to happen instantly. But God's in the teaching process. And through that period of patience, he's working on us and he's teaching us. When I came to Christ, because everything down there is getting to the big leagues. I mean, that's what everybody, the players, trainers, broadcasters at that level, it's all about getting to the big leagues. Every one of them, me included. But through that process, God is teaching us, chill. Be patient. Your time hasn't come yet. You're not ready yet. But when he thought I was ready, Dr. Jack Ramsey called me out of a clear blue sky. I couldn't believe it later. I never met the man. But there it was. And so I left Spartanburg and I'm in Philadelphia, like overnight. I mean, literally from one day to the next. Be patient, Pat, be patient. Does that make sense? Now, here's the third wisdom principle. Oh, and I'm teaching this to our young people at the Magic organization. Teaching it to my adult children. Here's Mr. Littlejohn. You got to have experience, Pat. You got to have experience. In other words, you got to pay your dues. And he kept saying, you got to learn this business, meaning professional baseball. He said, you got to learn this business from the ground up. He said, if you get to the top too quickly, and you don't have the experience, you don't have the foundation, you don't have the solid base to build on, he said, you could really stub your toe. That was one of his favorite expressions. For fouling up, you could stub your toe, bud. He called me bud. He said, you could stub your toe. So he kept saying, you need to learn down here how to run a concession operation and how the box office works. And you need to learn about how to deal with young ball players, many of them away from home for the first time. And you need to learn how to have experience getting along with a professional manager, because you're going to have them, when you go higher. And now's the time you've got to experience all of this. I kind of chuckle because we have many, many youngsters working for us with the magic, including, about 25 or 30 interns every 6 months. And I tell them the same story because they all want to be the general manager of the team now, or some NBA team. There are only 30 of them. There are only 30 teams. And all of these youngsters, they all want to be the GM. And I keep telling them, you got to have experience. You got to build relationships. You got to get to know a lot of people. You got to really know this business inside out. You got to volunteer for everything, I tell them as interns. Every single event going on where some help is needed, volunteer for everything. Because you've got to have experience at every level. Now, Mr. Littlejohn was right. So when I got to Philadelphia at age 28, I didn't stub my toe. I was able to step right in, really, moving from Spartanburg to Philadelphia and function well and do my job because he had kept stressing the importance of having experience. Here's the fourth wisdom principle. Keep it simple, Pat. Keep it simple. Life is not complicated, he kept stressing. And we have a way of getting it all flused up, he would say. Taking basically simple situations, getting them so complicated that nobody can understand them. And particularly he stressed the importance of keeping things simple in your communication. I would sit down with him and I'd have all these ideas and different plans and I would present them to him and he would pause and say, Pat, he said, I'm just a farm boy from Cross Anchor. That was the country home where he says, I don't have a big degree from Wake Forest or a master's degree from Indiana. He said, I don't drive around in a fancy Olds Toronado, which was a hot car then. And he helped me get him. He wanted me in it. But nevertheless, he said, I'm just a country boy. He said, you're going to have to really make this simple for me. And so I learned a lesson. Don't babble. In other words, when you're trying to explain or you're trying to run a meeting or you're got a meeting with your owner, express yourself in such simple terms, clear and precise, that they can understand it. I struggle with babblers. That they will come to visit with me with an idea, and they go on for 15 minutes or so. Finally, I will say, could you express that in one sentence? Just one sentence. Just explain to me in one sentence what it is you're saying. At that point, generally, I get it. But my message really should be, why didn't you do that from the beginning? Just to open this discussion with one sentence about what's on your mind and what your idea is. You getting this, ladies and gentlemen? Keep it simple, Pat. Keep it simple. Life is not complicated. And it's not. Just keep it simple. Here's wisdom principle number 5 from Mr. Littlejohn. Don't run from your problems, he said many times. Don't run from your problems. They give you a wonderful chance to sell yourself to others. Minor league baseball, particularly in those days, attracted problems. For some reason, it just attracted problems. Like everything might be going well, but then you get a phone call that the Phillies are moving your best hitter up a notch, and he's going to be leaving today. And your big game tonight, well, the hot dog vendor didn't show up. And the ladies' restroom has gotten stopped up. Whew. And then the thunderstorm hits. I mean, endless problems. So generally, I would gather them all up, get a collection of them, drive out to Mr. Littlejohn's office, and dump them on his desk. But they didn't stay there long because he was so thrilled about these problems that were coming my way. Thrilled. And every problem he would say, now this problem gives you a wonderful chance to sell yourself to the brass in Philadelphia. And this problem that you're having with the banker, you know, downtown, oh, what a chance to sell yourself to him. And on it would go, every problem. It's not what I wanted to hear. I mean, why couldn't he just magically solve them all so I could have a productive life? But every problem he felt you could sell yourself. And then he made an interesting statement. He said, anybody can lead and run a team when everything's going well. He said, anybody can do that. He said, but it's when the problems begin to descend, that's when we find out who can really operate here. That's when we really discover who's good at this. And I've thought about this. Now, we do not want to create and invent problems deliberately so we can go sell ourselves to others. Not a good idea. But it's very important, I think, to anticipate problems. You know, when we see them coming, I think it's important to head them off, try and nip them in the bud, get them resolved as early as we can. Can't always do that. But when they come, don't run from them. We need to deal with them. Need to think through and how are we going to tackle these problems and how are we going to resolve them. Now, we can't put our heads in the sand. He was strong on dealing with problems. And I got that message very young, as a young baseball guy. And they've stayed with me. Don't run from your problems. They give you a wonderful chance to sell yourself to others. And here's the sixth wisdom principle. Take care of the little things, said Mr. Littlejohn, before they become big things. Well, that was really big for him. Now, his company, he was in the oil transportation business, Associated Petroleum Carriers. And he had these big petroleum trucks running up and down the highway, you know, in the southeast primarily. And the biggest crisis in their world would be when one of those trucks would foul up or end up in a ditch or something. That was a disaster. And many times, it might be because a mechanic failed to tighten that little lug wrench on a tire. And the tire got wobbly and, you know, something like that. So he was a fanatic in his business on taking care of the little things before they became a big thing. And when one of those tankers would flip over or something or catch on fire because a tire went wacko, whew, I mean, that was huge. And he kept stressing to me in running that ball club, Get these little things handled. Deal with them. Personnel issues, a leak in the roof on the grandstand. I mean, get them handled before they become a big issue. I had an interesting experience. John Wooden, the great UCLA coaching legend, let me into his life because I wanted to write a book about him called How to Be Like Coach Wooden. I brought some copies here today, by the way, and for a number of years, boy, I plowed into the life of the great John Wooden, the greatest coach in the history of sports in America. It was a real privilege. So one night, we're sitting there over dinner at his favorite spot, the Valley Inn, near his home in Encino, California. At this point, gosh, he was probably 90. He lived till 99. He was probably 90. And I was sitting next to him, and I leaned over and I said, Coach, could you pinpoint one secret of success in life? He didn't answer immediately, but then he said, the closest I could come to one secret of success would be a lot of little things done well. That's what he said. The closest I could come to one secret of success would be a lot of little things done well. And that's how he coached, with his practice plans and, how to handle equipment properly. I mean, it echoed my friend Mr. Littlejohn decades before. So I thought there was a pattern there from these successful business people or coaches. A lot of little things done well lead to a productive, successful life. Wisdom. It's a great quality, isn't it? So where do we get it from? What can we do about getting wisdom? 2 quick thoughts. Number 1, hang with the smartest people you can find. The wisest people you can find. Call them mentors. You can call them life coaches. You can call them sages. I don't care what you call them, but hang with them. They're out there. They're not a huge number, but they're there. And you may need, maybe 3 or 4. A mentor in the spiritual area, maybe one in the financial area, maybe one in the family area, but hang with mentors. And do what they tell you. If I had gotten these wisdom principles from Mr. Littlejohn and then just flipped them off and just done whatever I wanted, how long would he have wanted to mentor me? Not long. Mentors are going to walk away and give up pretty quickly if their mentorees, are not responding. But find the wisest people you can and hang with them, and they're there. And the second way I have found for wisdom is to be a lifelong reader. It's amazing. You see, God gives men and women great wisdom who write. I'm convinced of that, including your pastor, who's a wonderful author. And his books are filled with wisdom, just filled with it. And there are many others. So be a lifelong reader. And you're going to get wisdom from the life of George Washington. By reading about him, you're going to get wisdom from Abraham Lincoln. You're going to get wisdom from Winston Churchill and Martin Luther King Jr. and Mother Teresa and Billy Graham and Ronald Reagan. I mean, these are men and women of wisdom, and people who write about them, or they wrote about their own lives, just chock with wisdom that you're going to benefit from. And maybe even me. I mean, I brought a bunch of books here, as Scott said, so I'd like to meet you all. Happy to sign the books. And then what, Scott? A hot dog with chili?
Hot dog with chili.
Wow.
Buy one book, get a free hot dog.
No. I've already sampled the lemonade, and it's very, very good. Very good. Okay, gang, there it is. There's your wisdom for the week. Go get them. Go get them. Go get them.
Thanks, man. Great job.